Session 8, Follow Textual Cues. For the last couple weeks, I have got the pleasure to just watch you read during reading and pick up on some of those habits that I'm seeing and talk to you about the kind of books you love or steer you in the right direction. But this week, we're really going to work on the mind work that you're going to do when you're reading. On Friday, our video was stopping and doing a comprehension check. That's just one piece of the mind work. So tonight, I want to teach you that readers have to think what the text is telling us to do as we read. Authors write books in different ways. So maybe they want us to think certain things as we're reading. As we are reading, we have to decide, does the author want me to read and make a mental movie? Or does the author want me to stop and make a list or collect information to jot down about what's happening in my story? So you are probably wondering, Mrs. Evans, how will I know when I'm supposed to change the mind work that I'm meant to do? If your book, if your text is reading like a movie, the character is describing how the character is doing things, how the character is interacting with others. You're kind of taking in the setting of the story, lots of descriptive words, ways that you could paint a picture in your mind. That's envisioning. That's making a mental movie. Honestly, most of the time when we are reading fiction books, our minds are meant to make those mental movies. We talked about the other day in class when we were doing our read aloud that there aren't very many pictures in our chapter books. So it's our brain's job to paint those pictures for us. And so as we grow as readers and we take our brain to a higher level, every time we read a book, we have to envision what's happening in our stories. Now, sometimes the author might be telling us that something that the author's doing, or the character is doing, that we need to make note of. That's more of making a list. In our read aloud, that happened when the author was telling us about Little Willie and the harvest. So I'm going to reread just that small section to you, and I want you to be listening in to, did you hear that cue that switched us from mind work to our mental movie to making a list? Listen to see if you can find that spot. That evening, Little Willie made a discovery. He was sitting at the foot of Grandfather's bed playing a harmonica. He wasn't as good as Grandfather by a long shot, and whenever he missed a note, Searchlight would put her head back and howl. So I'm totally supposed to be making a mental movie right now. I can see Little Willie sitting on the bed with his harmonica, and then Searchlight like screeching, making a howl because it was so bad. Definitely a mental picture part. Once Little Willie was way off key, and Searchlight actually grabbed the harmonica in her mouth, continuing, and ran out of the room with it. Do you want me to play some more? Little Willie asked Grandfather, knowing very well that Grandfather would not answer. Grandfather had not talked, not one word, for over 3 weeks. But something happened that was almost like talking. Grandfather put his hand down on the bed with his palm facing upward. Little Willie looked at his hand for a really long time and then asked in a whisper, "Does that mean yes?" Grandfather closed his hand slowly and opened it again. Little Willie rushed to the side of the bed. His eyes were wild with excitement. So hopefully you can picture these things. His hand opening and closing, and little William running to get closer to grandfather because he realized that grandfather is now talking to him, just using his hand as a gesture. What's the sign for no? Grandfather turned his hand over and laid it flat on the bed. Palm down meant no. Palm up meant yes. Before the night was over, they had worked out other signals in their hand and finger code. One finger meant I'm hungry. 2 fingers meant water. But most of the time, little Willie just asked questions that grandfather could either answer yes or no. And Searchlight seemed to know what was going on, for she would lick grandfather's hand every time he made a sign. So, throughout that whole section, we should be making that movie in our brains, seeing what our character is doing and how he's interacting with Searchlight and Grandpa. The next day, little Willie began to prepare for harvest. There was a lot of work to be done. The underground shed, where the potatoes would be stored until they could be sold, had to be cleaned. The potato sacks had to be inspected and mended if need be. The plow had to be sharpened. But most important, because grandfather's old mare had died last winter, a horse to pull the plow had to be located and rented. If you notice there, I'm not really painting a mental picture anymore. I'm making a list of things that have to be done. Little Willie had 4 major things that had to be done before he could harvest the potatoes. So I am writing down those that list, or making a mental note of all the things that he's doing. So now I'm more of a reporter than I was of a storyteller. As you're reading, I want you to pay attention to the cues that the author is giving you. If it's has a lot to do with our characters and the setting and the interactions between them, then you're definitely making a mental movie. You're painting that picture in your brain. But if there is any sort of collection of a list, steps that we're following, that's our cue to change from storyteller to reporter and keep those important list ideas in our brains so that we know what our character must do.